city of residence. Each speaker may address the council for 3 minutes. Speakers shall refrain from entering into a dialogue with council members or city staff and from making comments regarding the good name and character of any individual. Campaigning is not council business, so please refrain from making any political statements at this time. Before we get started, I want to ask Ms. Sparks, would you like a handheld microphone for yourself and your mother? We will start tonight with Ms. Ashley Sparks.
Smarter than me. I have a lot to say in 3 minutes, but I want to take you back to a moment that happened in this city 26 years ago. We stood at the ribbon cutting at John Hunt Park that we've spoken so much about today, and witnessed the ribbon cutting of the first accessible playground in North Alabama. The woman to my right, my mother, led that effort to get that playground built here. I watched as our pastor's daughter, who had never been able to access a playground in her life, wheeled onto that playground, and her mother sobbed and said, "I've never gotten to see her do this." And thankfully, that's not something that we see anymore. Many, many more accessible playgrounds are part of our city now, part of our world. However, this still is a unique place because the community came together. There was no city ordinance, there was no city funding. It was literally every penny, and I mean that literally, pennies in jugs placed at schools, built this playground. 4,000 volunteers working 7 days and nights from age 5 to 75 built this playground. And that's not something that we see very often at our day and age. People putting aside all of their differences and coming together to make something for those who don't have access. And 3 years ago I stood here and I asked for reassurances that the original park would be honored. Yes, it's time to renovate. Yes, it's time to update. But I asked specifically that the space shuttle would be preserved, that the pavers would be preserved, the donor board, and that it would be incorporated into the new design. And I was absolutely devastated to see the press release that ironically appeared right next to a City of Huntsville Preservation press release on Arbor Day with no remnant of the original playground in sight. I'm heartbroken to know that all of these pieces are gone, demolished. Where is the preservation? I've always loved that my city has prided itself on preserving our history and making who we have always been and who we are come together for our future. I'm all about progress. It's time to update, it's time to renovate. But why are we throwing out the baby with the bathwater? I spoke with Mr. Gossett, Director of Parks and Rec, and I appreciated that he took my call, but I received no real tangible answers. I received placation, and I am not here to be placated. I'm here to see this stop. We need to halt this and honor the promises that were made, that those who were originally involved will be involved in the process of moving forward with it, that the community will be consulted in the playground that they built and handed over to the city in good faith 26 years ago, and that trust can be restored, because right now, my faith that what this council says will be done, will be followed through, has been very shaken. And that is heartbreaking to me. That is all I have to say. But my mother, Laura, is, I believe, next. So,
She absolutely is. Thank you very much. With any council member? Okay. Please, Ms. Laura Noblett.
I'm going to request patience. She has had a stroke when she assisted with getting this playground started. She didn't know that she would one day have a grandchild with special needs or one day be confined to a wheelchair herself. She struggles to get the words out. I will be assisting her as needed.
Yes, ma'am.
But please have patience with her.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
I'm the one that,
Could you please give your address?
704 Rice Circle.
Thank you.
I believe I'm the one that years ago
She initiated the effort to get this playground built when there was no handicap accessible playground in North Alabama. Yes, they started with Parks and Recs because they didn't really have a path forward, and so that is why the community came together to build this playground. And I recall Councilman Kling, when I spoke here 3 years ago, I remember you saying that you remembered me as a child coming to your office with her, because children were as much a part of building this as anyone. But her name actually is ironically not on that billboard. This was never about preserving anyone's name. It was about preserving the legacy of a community coming together. That's
really. I'm extremely stirred that they have no.
We feel that the park was disrespected and the work was disrespected.
It was. 4,500 volunteers. 4,500. Would you like to see it on the name?
So we just ask that the park's legacy be honored and demolishing it is not honoring its legacy. Thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you both very, very much. Really, thank you. Mr. Keith?
I think it's really just nothing left to people on this topic, but if there are any others.
There are.
Okay, now just
You
wait till
wanna
the
wait?
end.
Okay,
Yes, sir.
that sounds good. Tyler Green. One of the ones in the back, either one, the ones in the back.
Mayor Battle, President
Your address, please.
Meredith. My name is Tyler Green. My address relevant to this particular topic is 2004 Airport Road at the corner of Airport Road and Memorial Parkway, where I work. I'm also a resident of the city of Huntsville. I have been my whole life. And so I wish to speak to each of you individually because each of you are vested with the power to do something about this. And so I'll start over. Thank you for reminding me this is my first city council meeting. And I've never been engaged by anything like this before. Never cared about anything quite like this before. But I am very angry right now. And I'll share with you that Ashley here and I went to high school together. I haven't spoken to each other since we were in high school together. And just so happened to discover our mutual passion about this when she made posts about it. And I didn't know that they would be here today until about a week and a half ago, when I realized that what seemed to be proposed wasn't at all talked about, because what's on the city website is at best misleading with respect to what's going to be out there. There's a bunch of trees in the background and a mountain, and I'm here to tell each of you in this room that that view does not exist. It's physically impossible unless you've taken things out. Now, I know we have taken things out so that we can see what was there. The shade structures, why do we need shade structures? Because we're removing trees. Why are we removing trees? I don't know. I have a lot to say about this, and 3 minutes isn't enough time. I have been following very carefully what has been going on in Kidspace. I signed a lease in an office adjacent to it because of the view of the trees out that window, because I thought that that would lead to the best possible place for patients to be able to heal and relax. When I started to reach out to members of the city leadership last week, sometimes I got a response and sometimes I didn't. And when you don't get a response, you have to come here and talk about it in public. And I have a lot of things to say that don't look good for the city, and I love the city. I love the city of Huntsville, and I appreciate each of the people in this room that lead the city of Huntsville. I do, and I mean that. And I'm on your team. We're a family. The families talk about things. Mayor Battle, you once said, sir, at least in the news, that you saw that perhaps as like Huntsville Central Park. It is exactly in the middle of the city. Well, I went on the Central Park Conservancy's website last night, and I noted that, I'll just read from an excerpt. They have something more than 20 parks in Central Park, and there, let's see, they say, unlike most urban playgrounds, which are often completely re-envisioned to reflect new ideas about play and design standards, the Central Park Conservancy has carefully rebuilt the adventure-style playgrounds to preserve their original intent and unique forms while upgrading their infrastructure, adding new features, and making them accessible. In fact, the Tar Family Playground was rebuilt for about a year and a half almost, in about 2018. Some of the stuff's still there. I have a lot to say.
I'm sorry, Mr.
And
Green.
if I may just close, I would like to call the council to action, to call for an immediate halt to destruction of what's out there. What are we in a hurry for? Are the Olympics going to be here in 2023? We're talking about kids needing to come, like, we need to upgrade it because the kids,
Mr. Green, I'm afraid I'm gonna have to cut you off. But
if we don't do that, all I ask is that we have a public dialogue about why we didn't,
Thank you.
and that hasn't happened.
thank you, Mr. Green. Greatly appreciate your comments. Alan Green.
City and the council is to be commended.
Can I get your address, sir?
Alan Green, 823 Animal Avenue.
Thank you.
City and the council is to be commended for the things that are happening under your purview as regards this park. I'm sure that somewhere, as a former member of the City Planning Commission, I am aware of the excellence and thoroughness of planning that goes into things such as this. Therefore, I'm sure that somewhere there is a rationale that either qualitatively or cost-wise justifies the destruction of the physical environment as it exists. And if there are like 4,000 bricks there, for those people, including him, are they gonna stay? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Green. Mr. Keith, that is it for kids-based comments, if you'd like the floor.
And again, and I think that, thank you, colleagues, I think Carl Hampton's gonna come to speak to. Obviously, I've been in this situation of discussing things that should remain, and maybe get an overview, if you could, by Carl Hampton on some of the rationale. Maybe the RFP was put out, the process of the design, and input that I've received. I thank everybody for sending the emails, but Carl Hampton could come speak to it.
Councilmember John Hamilton, City Administrator. So, this project was managed, procedurally the same as, really any construction project in the city in terms of going through master planning process, professional design process, and go through, planning commissions, processes, and ultimately approval of contract here with the city council. Now, outside of that formal process, and let me back up, because that formal process does involve a number of, formal public hearings associated with doing that. Everything the city builds, in addition to coming here to council and getting approval on either the design contracts and the construction contracts, a portion of that process is also going through location, character, and extent of the appointed boards, the planning commission, and before that, the subdivision committee that serves. So they both conduct public meetings and go through LC&E on every one of our projects. And this one was no different than any other city project. But outside of that formal process, the master plan for John Hunt Park has also gone through that same LC&E process and approval by city council multiple times. It's also been presented outside of a formal approval process. It's also been presented publicly dozens and dozens of times. Probably most notably in multiple of the mayor's states of the city, but also through presentations to lots of different civic groups that are interested in that master plan, and then also presentation through the media. Now that's big picture master plan, and the master plan has always reflected exactly what we're doing there in the kids space area. In addition to that, it's specific to the kid space. Because of having the skate park additionally, it has also, over the last year and a half or so, been multiple press conferences and press releases and things that discuss that entire area. The contract, if you go back when you approved the contract a couple of meetings ago, it says kid space. It's actually for that entire area, kid space being one portion, kid space playground being only one portion of that contract. But it kept that name on there so that it's clear exactly what region of the park we're talking about. But the need to rebuild that playground has been discussed publicly over and over and over again in lots of different forums. And I feel confident, we've always been clear that it was a rebuild of that playground. That's true of lots of things that we oftentimes, when facilities reach their full useful life based on their construction standards, have to get rebuilt. That's not unique. It's not a unique situation. As you've heard tonight, and as I think all of you already do, that was a great community effort, 26 years ago, and built a great playground that has now gone beyond its useful life because of the nature of the construction of it. It was made out of wood. When you put wood in the ground, it rots. So as that playground is going through demolition right now, we're finding lots of wood rot that we knew was there. It's why it needs to be rebuilt. And quite frankly, we were rapidly approaching a time where it was going to have to be shut down for safety reasons regardless. And we've talked quite a bit about the need to rebuild that playground. We've shown the images of what was going to go there. And it should, from those images, obviously, and some of the citizens described them, it clearly is a complete rebuild of the playground that was there. And that's always been the plan for that site. There are a few trees that are affected by that. As we've had with a lot of construction projects. Dr. Green and I have spoken, I guess earlier this week, for a while about the tree canopy. There are a number of trees that have grown up inside of the footprint. That project requires some upgrades to the drainage system. It requires regrading in order to accommodate the rebuild. There are a number of trees that our arborist has looked at that would not survive that process. So as part of that construction contract that you approved, it does include demolition of some trees. What it also does, though, just within this construction contract, and this is not the entire picture, that construction contract puts back about 10 times that number of trees. Outside of this contract, there's areas there that we will add additional forestation to as part of the overall master plan and what we're doing throughout John Park, so to be consistent with what we're doing and provide a buffer between that playground and some of the roads and things that are around it. I've been asked, why not put the playground up next to Airport Road where there's fewer trees that will be impacted by it? Well, because we don't want that playground right next to Airport Road. Essentially, every garbage truck and lots of utility trucks and lots of other industrial traffic as well as private traffic flows on Airport Road. And our master plan does not call for positioning our central city playground adjacent to that highway. We feel as though it's much better to buffer it. So from a landscape design perspective and getting additional forested areas within the park, I believe that area is better suited for that type of use and give us a buffer between those play areas and a very, very busy road that carries a lot of industrial traffic. So from a design perspective, that's the answer to that question, which a couple of you have posed to me. That does not in the overall design master plan call for the area to get more landscape buffer. Is why we're not don't want to build up against the road there. So I completely understand if people when they're involved in a project are passionate about that project, but unfortunately things that man build don't last forever. And ultimately facilities of all kinds, even things made out of steel and concrete, oftentimes reach their useful life and have to be demolished and replaced. In this case, this wonderful playground was built out of wood, and it just is not going to be able to last. It's got to be rebuilt. And so that's what contract we brought to you and that you approved is to rebuild that playground in accordance with the design that went through the planning commission. So happy to take on any other questions. I haven't hit on each of the things.
No, you did. Thank you. And again, particularly for me, I'll speak for myself. I've been through the process of individuals in the community connected to a space that we had to demolish for a number of reasons. Can you now speak to, and I'll be done, speak to the decision that was made, how this actually, and again, like you stated, for 20, we'll just say 30 years, this structure has stood. What do you see as the benefits of the decision, the material and the structure that we're now choosing, the life of it.
So what we're building is with, manufactured equipment, that is, from some of the, there's multiple, really two main providers of playground equipment, that work throughout our region. The two that, for the most part, build the playgrounds here at Huntsville, so it's one of those two companies, Compan, I think is how you pronounce the name. It is, as you see in a lot of our new playgrounds, predominantly steel. It's some plastic. It does have components that over time will have to be replaced. It will not last forever. It is concrete foundations for those structures. And again, there is no playground that lasts forever. Even the ones that are made out of steel and concrete, we're now going through and doing replacement and additions to. Crawford Park, we're right now in design on essentially rebuild of that playground. It's all made out of steel and concrete, but in a lot of the components eventually do reach their useful life and have to be replaced. So that happens at all the playgrounds around the city. And so this is not unique in that sense. It's certainly unique in the way in which it was built originally. It's certainly unique, the way it was funded and things like that, as you've heard. But it's not unique in the need to be rebuilt and things like we do other places. I do want to hit on one thing that I did not mention before that I should have. As was noted in the Kids Space Playground, there were a number of different ways in which people that were involved or contributed to it were honored. The Parks and Rec staff has recovered those materials, and they will be used for a site there to honor that effort and to make sure that we remember the history of what got us started, what turned that particular piece of dirt into a play area, and the intent to keep it that way long term and continue to go through the life cycle replacements on deep into the future.
Thank you, Mr. Keith. Ms. Akridge?
What material is that? Is that the bricks you're referring to?
It's actually, there's a combination of things. There are some bricks, there's some granite blocks, there's some plaques, there's a number of different things, and Mr. Gossett and staff have recovered those.
Is that what Mr. Andrew Green was asking about?
I believe he commented on the fact that there are those types of things, and yes, we did recover those out of the playground.
Okay. I remember when Ashley Sparks came here, and she specifically asked, I don't remember that she'd asked for the space shuttle and the bricks to be honored or saved, but the point being is that now that we're here, what I see is a tremendous grieving process that's happening, not just for two people, but for many people who might have put their hands on that dirt. In the process of these decisions, was Ashley Sparks ever called and invited to look over these plans anytime within the last 3 years?
Actually, I would say I don't have the exact date in my head, obviously, but actually I think it was more than 3 years ago. Mr. Ivy, when he was the director of Parks and Recreation, spoke to her a number of times about the long-term plans there, and now whether or not he was gone as we got into the detailed design. So whether or not it was Reese who was the director at the time the specific designs were finished, whether or not Ms. Sparks was actually shown the design, I don't know that, but I know she was spoken to by Mr. Ivy.
I would love to know, because these are the end users that we have to understand that have built our city, and I find that the reading that they're doing they also feel disrespected, and I am having a real difficult time knowing why somebody hasn't just we talked about community groups who are interested in the park, big picture, but was anybody ever shown the plans and understand where in context in the rest of the park? And I don't mean just the planning commission and the location character and extent, and nor the subdivision committee, because they see a lot of plans and they're just looking at this and that, and they, like me, didn't understand that it was a grove of trees that was gonna go away, and maybe it was a good decision, but it wasn't. The people who are gonna be climbing on that thing, Jessica Burkholz was never called, the people who did the Cove Universal Playground were never called. Not that they need to be involved in the actual equipment, but just involved. It sounds as though the conclusion is that the people who built it were never included. What might be done to help them through their grief at this stage.
If I could fill in council a little bit on this, on this issue, we talked about this issue, gosh, it must have been 5 or 6 years ago, as we were doing the, John Hunt Park plans, and we started coming up with the John Hunt Park plans, and the call at that point by the Department of Recreation manager, was that we were going to have to replace the playground, equipment all out there, and I kept asking, why are we having to replace it with the playground equipment? It's because of splinters and rot, and that was the answer 5 years ago, that there were splinters coming out of the wooden pieces of equipment, and that there was rot, and there was fear that it could fall down. If you remember, one of the first plans that we had 5, 6 years ago was to put the playground over across the road and back towards the tennis center in the little island there. Because of conversations that Mr. Ivy had with people who were involved with the playground when it was built and when it first came up, we decided to put it back in the same place that it was that it originally come from. And that was a conversation that he had with the people who were involved with it. Mr. Ivy was very involved with it. He was in Parks and Recreation for 42 years. And was very involved with the community out there. They were very involved with the Everyone Could Play playground that we put up within a mile of that, and was working with some of the same people who put that park up were the ones who worked with us on the Everyone Can Play playground. So there has been a lot of conversation that has been had over the years, and this plan has evolved over the years. It wasn't just brought up last night. It's been 6, 7, 8 years that we've been working on this plan.
In this second, if I could answer your question specifically. So, when we look to expanding the soccer complex, for example, there are a very finite number of soccer clubs and high school programs and coaches that are easily definable. They have organizational structure that defines representation for the soccer playing community, and we can sit down with those known representatives of our community and engage with them, understand their needs, their wants, and dislikes. We can adjudicate when they disagree with each other, because they oftentimes do. So oftentimes we're taking, one club says do it this way, another one says do it a different way, and then we have to engage other experts, but it's a definable group of people. Same is true of volleyball. We talk about Joe Davis Stadium. The school system provided us an athletic director and actual high school coaches. They provided us band director who engaged with folks that actually organize and run professional soccer. We got input from the head of the local rugby association. Those are definable groups that represent specific user groups. Playgrounds is a completely different animal. The user group for this playground is all 220,000 people in our city. And there is no association of playground mothers, fathers, whatever that may be.
Yes.
So I told you that absolutely we engage with citizen, and I absolutely stand by that, but let me explain what that means in this context. It is not really a comparable to soccer clubs or some sort of actual organization. So our Parks and Rec staff engages with the users of all their playgrounds routinely. They are day after day, month after month, year after year, receiving input on what people like or don't like. I would absolutely disagree with the statement that Jessica Burkholz wasn't consulted. We spent an enormous amount of time with her and the other users there, going through the design, hearing their input on what they're looking for in a playground. Every one of those conversations that resulted in the design of that Hampton Cove area playground also influenced this design. Every time we talk to people in the neighborhood around Crawford Park about what they'd like to see or not see in their playground, that inform this playground, because here's the way in which we deliver playgrounds to our community. There are neighborhood playgrounds scattered all over our city of varying sizes, but generally pretty close within there's a kind of a neighborhood scale playground that we have all over our community. And we have one really big central playground that, from the way in which we intend to deliver to our community and market it to the community, engage with the community, it belongs to everybody. This isn't South Huntsville or North Huntsville or West Huntsville or East Huntsville. This is in the central part of our city and serves our entire community. It is probably, you know, we can go out and count the actual square footage and the equipment, but at least 3 times bigger than any other playground in our community. It's intended to be a large central playground, and it is the result of years worth of experience and years worth of input from all of the mamas and daddies that our Parks and Rec staff and the architects have been engaging with across a long period of time.
Thank you for explaining the transfer, those kinds of things transferred to this. So it sounds as though it's, so, and I know Mr. Ivy was famous for knowing who his end users and customers were. He can probably tell you who wore pink slippers and who wore fuzzy blue slippers. He knew the people. So it sounds as though that perhaps there was conversations with Ms. Nobbler and Ms. Sparks through Mr. Ivy. And maybe then there was lulls because of changes over time. But I am grateful to know that at one point, the users said no to across the street and it came back to its original location.
Yeah, I mean, in that,
That's interaction.
so absolutely, had we done it that way, then absolutely the kids' space area would have ceased to be a playground. We would have, there was never a point at which there was a contemplation of having 2 different playgrounds inside the same park. It was gonna be one or the other. So, you know, obviously everybody can kind of have their own perspective on what's the best and the right way to honor the history of that site. I would argue that completely relocating it elsewhere certainly would not honor, you know, the history of what occurred at that site.
Okay, so it sounds like we have several people who feel forgotten, and it's impossible to capture everybody, as you just said, because there's so many different user groups, but that the professionals do know what the lessons learned are. How offline we could think about a way to help Ms. Nobbert and Ms. Sparks in their grief, and even Mr. Green, perhaps Tyler Green as well as Andrew Green. Maybe there could be a coffee clutch where we talk about how sometimes the process of grieving means being there for somebody.
Thank you, Ms. Akers. Mr. Quinn?
Mr. President, I gotta agree with Mr. Hamilton. I think in their battle, there was a lot of discussion about this. I think council members have heard plans or, you know, things mentioned about the master plan or things about, you know, playground, new playground going to John Hunt. Since there is concerns have been expressed, and I can respect, all those volunteers, and I don't think that was exaggerating one bit. I mean, there were, you know, way back then, there were lots and lots and lots of people that were involved in that. Is there any way that, the playground equipment can somehow be, repaired? You know, we've got brick sidewalks downtown that Public Works is working on to repair and to replace and put back in, but is there a way that the playground equipment could be pulled up, repair the, you know, the eroding areas on the bottom, maybe sealing, shellacking the areas where, you know, there are splitters coming through? I mean, I don't know, I'm just trying to see if there's a way that somehow this equipment could be repaired and put in as part of the new, big park that's gonna be coming in. Is that feasible or something that could be done?
Mr. Quinn, I don't believe it is. One, there, you know, a significant amount of deterioration and rot, and one of the challenges that we have as, you know, as a government entity, you know, is to talk about accessibility, and the definition of accessibility, you know, 20, 30, 40 years ago was significantly different than what is the definition now legally, statutorily, today. So we are obligated as we build any of these kind of facilities to make sure that that's taken into consideration and is built to those kind of standards.
So
that's
ADA
one issue that would have to be dealt with. A wooden structure like that, we don't believe, architects don't believe you could achieve the regulatory standards required for that kind of accessibility.
So ADA kind of kicks in on this,
It's absolutely a big part of that. And so, and also I think it's important to note, this was a very important part of the design of the playground that we engaged with folks on out off of Taylor Road. You know, accessibility, most people think of, and you know, the law points you there first, of physical mobility, you know, mobility challenges And obviously that's a huge part of accessibility, but also when you're talking about equipment or things for children to play with, we also consider, the companies that have designed this equipment also consider, intellectual disabilities to ensure that it's truly inclusive of all children, not just those that might, first off, obviously kids that are able, but then also children with mobility challenges, but then also kids that have other challenges, and trying to be as inclusive as you possibly can across that entire population. So those are all things that are considered within these design companies and this equipment, and ultimately the assemblage of this equipment. I think if somebody wanted to recreate a wooden, fort-like play area like Kid Space was,